My name is Carl Bishop, and I want to share my testimony with anybody that is going to be able to watch this video. Born in Charlotte, North Carolina, but lived here in San Antonio, Texas my whole life. My family moved here when I was only 3 years old. My dad was in the Air Force, and my mother is from Peru. She's a immigrant, and we moved here when I was only 3 years old. My mom and dad ended up getting divorced when I was about 4 or 5. I don't really remember a whole lot of it, but I do know that my dad was kind of a free spirit, if you will. He kind of wanted to live that party lifestyle, and then my mother was very conservative for the most part. I've always told people she's the spiritual leader of our family because she is. She was the one that had us in church every Sunday, that had us reading the Word, and has been our rock, if you will, for the family over the years. So I had a pretty great childhood growing up. My mother raised us for the most part. My dad would have us every other weekend, or at least 1 week in a month most of the time. And so, as I was growing up, I had these two very different elements. I had my dad, who was kind of like the Disneyland dad, if you will. We would go to Chuck E. Cheese, which is like a fun place where you can get pizza and play video games. He'd pretty much take us there every weekend. And my mother was kind of the disciplinarian, if you will. She would have us, going to church, waking up early, going running. She'd make us go running at an early age. I mean, she always was that way. And so I grew up, seeing both sides of it, seeing a more faith-based lifestyle versus a more, I would say, worldly lifestyle in my dad. And, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense until I started to become a teenager. I accepted Jesus into my life when I was 13 years old. I was at Brick Hill Baptist Church on the south side. It was real. I remember that day clearly. Back then, they would make you walk to the front, and basically you would be there in front of the entire congregation when you accepted the Lord. And so that's what we did, and I got baptized, and I remember feeling great and really feeling like encouraged during that time. But as I grew into a young adult, into a teenager, I would say that I really started to live like a much more worldly life. I started to, hang out with a lot of friends and kind of accept my dad's lifestyle a lot more. It was more of a party lifestyle, a lot of drinking, a lot of drug use, just a lot of just living life and doing the fun stuff that people would consider fun in the world. And when I became a teenager, I kind of went on a really rebellious streak, and I remember that time I didn't speak to my mother too much. She was always wanting me to to live right, to get back into church, and I just didn't want to hear it when I was a young adult. So that kind of went into my early teens, late teens, and even early 20s. And I was kind of just doing whatever I felt like doing. I like to tell people is that I lived a very selfish life when I was a young adult. I didn't really care about anybody else but myself. I'll never forget when I was 24 years old, hanging out with a lot of the wrong friends that people would consider wrong, bad influences, if you will. Well, we really got into poker back then. And one of my friends that I used to be a bartender at the place that I waited tables at. Him and I would go play poker at local poker games, which at the time, this was back 16, 17 years ago, it was illegal to play poker here in Texas. But I've always had kind of a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, and so my friend and I decided, hey, you know what? Why don't we create our own poker game? We could do this better than some of the ones that we had participated in. So we went out and we started our own poker room, which is essentially an illegal gambling facility. And we did that for about 8 or 9 months here in San Antonio. And we were very successful with it. I mean, at one point, I would say we were probably the #1 poker game in San Antonio where, you know, we had doctors, we had lawyers, we had businessmen that would come in and gamble in our facility. Sometimes we'd be gambling for days. It was a very toxic lifestyle for me because it was a lot of gambling, a lot of drinking, a lot of drug abuse, and so I remember those times. There'd be days where I would stay up for 2 or 3 days at a time, and it was just a very, very draining and toxic lifestyle. And so one night we were sitting there. It was a Saturday night, and it was a fairly small game. There was maybe like 12 or 13 players. We were sitting there. I was also sitting at the table gambling and playing poker. And all of a sudden the door flies open with a loud bang, boom. And I remember that 5 just really big guys wearing bandanas and carrying machine guns ran into the room and proceeded to rob us. And so everybody get down. I'll never forget because they said everybody get down, and I was closest to the door. And I guess the lead guy punched me in the back of the head, and my head flew down and like hit this massive pile of chips, and the chips flew everywhere. And everybody was freaked out. There was one guy that used to play in the game, and he was just the sweetest guy in the world. He was a teacher at a local high school here, and he stood up when they said everybody get down, as they were punching me in the head, and one of the robbers basically turned the machine gun around and hit him right in the forehead. Head split open, there was blood everywhere. It was just a really terrible experience. Probably one of the most, scary experiences I've ever been in my entire life. Anyways, they robbed us, they took all the money. Problem was, my dealer, one of my employees, if you will, was in the back, and he had the money that we were playing for, which is why they were there to rob us. It was for the game money, if you will. Well, he had jumped out the window and had ran for it with all the money. And so I remember very clearly the guys that were there to rob us were asking me for the money. And I couldn't give them the money because the guy had ran out with the money. So I remember very clearly the guy loaded the gun or cocked the weapon and pointed it right at my head and said, "If you don't get that money right now, I'm gonna blow your brains out." And I remember thinking at that moment, wow, I'm gonna die at the age of 24. Like, I'm just not gonna make it through this, because the guy that had the money literally was like probably miles away at that point. And I was there and I couldn't produce it. And they knew that it was my game and I was in charge. And I just closed my eyes and just prepared to be killed. Seconds, which seemed like hours at the time, clicked by, and eventually the other robbers said, "Let's get out of here, man." And so they left and did not kill me or do any more damage than they had done. And so I remember picking up the pieces, and I felt so terrible for my friend Dave, who had been injured terribly. He had to get stitches across his forehead. I remember feeling terrible about that. But I also remember very clearly that it was very much a miracle that I had made it through that. I remember thinking to be so fortunate that God had let me survive that. The police showed up about 30 minutes later, or maybe 15 minutes later. The neighbors had heard the commotion and called the police. I remember that when the police came in, I was like, oh no, now I'm gonna get arrested for running an illegal gambling operation here in the city of San Antonio. It seemed like every police officer in the force had shown up that day. Basically, I guess it was one of the officers, a police officer, one of the sergeants or lieutenants came in, and he said, who's in charge of this place? And we're all standing there, and everybody looks at me, and I say, "Yep, that would be me, sir." And he says, "It's quite an operation you guys have here, because I mean, you got to figure we had this apartment was purely for gambling, so we didn't even have a bed in there. It was just all gambling tables." And I said, "Yes, sir, this was mine." And he said, "Wow, I'm not gonna take you to jail. I'm not gonna even write you a ticket, but this is what happens to kids like you, and you're lucky to be alive." At that point, I made a decision. That was a turning point in my life. I say that God had saved my life on that day, and God had allowed that to happen to me so I could change. And so I wanted to change. It was not long after that that my first son was born, and also my father passed away. He passed away at a very young age. He was only 49, died due to complications with alcoholism. And, a lot of times people say, God's talking. I like to say God was screaming at me during that time. And that's when I really started to make some changes in my life. I remember going to my mom and telling her, that I wanted to start going back to church and that I wanted to change my life. And my mom is such an amazing lady. She really is, the hero of our family. And she was so happy that I was alive, number one, but I was willing to change. And so I rededicated my life to the Lord after that day. And, I changed. I made some commitments. I promised the Lord that I was never going to do anything illegitimate again. That from that point forward, I was going to be a legitimate business owner, or I was going to work legitimately. I wasn't going to take the easy way out anymore. Since then, the past 16 years has been a journey. I like to tell people, I'm a huge work in progress. I'm not somebody that, has it all together. But I realized that God had saved my life for a bigger purpose. And, what is that exactly? Well, I'm still discovering that every day that I'm here, but I go on mission trips now, and I share this story with people that I go on the mission trips with. And I like telling them that God saved my life so I could come here and share this good news with you. So hopefully He can save your life too. And I truly believe that. I truly believe that God saved my life so I could share this story and so more people could come to Him. And there's a story behind Jesus. Jesus, I believe, came here to die for our sins. And He's my Lord and Savior, and I believe He saved my life that night. And so I believe He can save your life too. If you're watching this and maybe you've had a tough time, maybe you've had a near-death experience like myself, or maybe you're just sick and tired of being sick and tired, give Jesus a chance. Let Him come into your life, and He can save your life the way He saved mine. He can change your life the way that He changed mine.